Welcome to Slacker Sports Show.
Good evening, sports fans, and welcome back to another podcast episode of Slacker Sports Show, where we discuss anything and everything you want to know about sports. Let's welcome in the co-host of the podcast, Mark. How are you, Mark?
Pretty good. Things in the sports world are starting to feel like they're back to normal. Get an occasional COVID test here, a coronavirus case here, but games are finally back up and going, so it's starting to feel a little bit more like normal.
Yeah, and it seems like every single day there's something new coming out, whether it be, like you said, a positive test or more testing procedures, or I even saw on a Twitter, someone tweeted out that the Denver Broncos walk through, it looks like a metal detector, but it's actually like a spray thing that's spraying them down and disinfecting and stuff. Mm-hmm. So it seems like every day there's something new that, evolving around sports with what's going on in the world. But one thing for sure is that everyone loves sports no matter what. And so we're here to bring you sports and some news and some stuff you might not know about sports or what's going on. So we're going to start off the night with some NBA, and the most exciting thing about the NBA is there was, 8 games, I think, that they were going to play when they started?
They had about, I'd say, like 6 to 8 warm-up games, kind of exhibition, get your feet back underneath you, and then now they're back into the what they call seeding games, which is finishing up seeding for the playoffs.
Yeah, so, it's about done. Teams are about done playing. There's a few teams that I feel like are definitely standing out and are definitely looking better than the rest, so to speak. I don't know really. I didn't really know the records coming into it. They've got some good records now. Like in the West, the Lakers are 51-15, and they're about 6.5 games up on the Clippers. And then also in the West, they've kind of locked in their top 7 playoff seats, and I don't know if they're going. I don't remember what you said last time about the podcast about how many they're seeding. Aren't they doing 8 in each, or is it top 8?
Yeah, they're sticking with the normal 8 once they get to the playoffs, but they invited teams that were within, I think, like 5 games of making the playoff spot to the bubble. So that's where they came up with the 22. But yeah, once the playoffs get here, it'll be just the normal 8 and 8 for each conference.
Yeah, and so kind of looking at like the West, most of it's already done. The Lakers, Clippers, Nuggets, Jazz, Rockets, Thunder, and Mavericks are already in. And then we got a couple teams that are kind of fighting for that last spot in the Grizzlies, Trailblazers, Spurs, Pelicans, Suns, and Kings, all of which are within like 2 or 3 games of each other. And so there's some teams that I've kind of been paying attention to that I feel like are playing above, I guess, what they kind of are as far as the bubble and everything. But those 7 are locked in. We're waiting kind of for that last spot. And then going over to the Eastern Conference where the Bucks are pretty much dominating. But they have lost 2 in a row. And the Raptors are behind them about 5 games, and they've won 6 in a row. So it looks like the Raptors are starting to play good at the right time. And the Bucks actually I watched the game the other night, and they didn't look like they were gelling, like they just weren't figuring it out. I don't know if they have problems, if they've lost players during this whole COVID thing. I'm not 100% sure, but there has been 6 teams on the Eastern side that have clinched that spot, and those teams are the Bucks, Raptors, Celtics, Heat, Pacers, and the 76ers.
Yeah, and then there's 2 playoff spots technically still open in the East. It's not really a race. It's not as interesting as the West. Brooklyn and Orlando still need to lock down their playoff spots. And Washington is still technically alive. Not really. They're pretty far behind. But the last 2 seeds in the East haven't been solidified yet. But it's basically Brooklyn and Orlando. But the West really intrigues me a lot more because you got a lot of good, especially young teams out there that have a chance. You got Memphis with their young core, Jaren Jackson Jr., John Morant, Brandon Clark. They're sitting the 8 seed right now. Portland, been around for a long time. Dame and CJ, they could definitely make some noise just because they have playoff experience, and they're an experienced group, probably the most experienced out of any of these lower seeded teams. San Antonio's in the mix, but I don't think they can really do much. New Orleans, obviously, interesting because of Zion, Lonzo Ball, all their young guys. And then you got Phoenix and Sacramento, which I don't expect them to make much noise going forward, but definitely have a lot more intense race in the East with teams that could legitimately make some noise. So the West is definitely interesting to me right now.
Yeah, and then the East, there, as you said, they've got a few teams. Basically, the Nets and the Magic are basically set. They just need to solidify that spot. I don't know if they're like, I don't know how many games each have left, but I think they would have to lose all their games, and the next person up would have to win all their games. And I still don't even know if it's really enough. So I don't know why they're not locked in, because I think they're like 6.5 games up on the next spot. Or no, they're about 7.5 games up on the next spot, which is the Hornets and the Wizards. So the Nets and Magic most likely in. And it's just weird because their records right now are below the 500 mark. You got the Nets at 32-35 and the Magic at 32-36. Whereas on that Western Conference side, you got basically the top 7 have all winning records. It's just weird to look at because it's like there's the top like 5 or 6 teams that are just well above 500, and then it's like everybody else is just at 500 or below that could still get into the playoffs.
Yeah, you definitely got a lot of kind of haves and have-nots as far as winning records. I mean, like you said, you got big chunk up the top of each conference, and then there's not a lot of fight maybe at the bottom. I mean, there's still some good teams that can make some noise, but as far as records, there's not much parity, I guess, overall.
Yeah, and so speaking about the records and who you think is playing well, who are your front runners as far as the Western and Eastern Conference? Who do you think is going to match up in the championship game?
In the East, I'd still say Milwaukee is probably my pick. They've just been great offensively and defensively all season. Like you said, they may have had some hiccups here in the bubble, may have just been a thing where it's been too much time off and they have to get back to normal. I really like Toronto. I know people kind of wrote them off after Kawhi left, but just the team they have coming back and Pascal Siakam playing out of his mind this year, I think they have a chance to make some noise, and they have that championship experience, so they could maybe fight off the Bucks, who have made some playoff runs but don't have the championship experience. Miami, another team that's interesting in the East. I don't know if they have enough this year, but they have a lot of really good pieces. Philadelphia, I've just been too burned by. I've been burned by them too much. I want them to win. I want them to be good, but they just always seem to find something that trips them up. In the West, I'd say it's basically the Lakers and Clippers and then everybody else. I like Denver. I like Jokic. I like all their surrounding pieces, but I just don't think they have enough to go head-to-head with the Lakers or Clippers in a 7-game series. Jazz, Rockets, Oklahoma City, Dallas, they all have solid teams, but I just think the Lakers and Clippers are so top-heavy that it is not going to really matter when we get down to it. So I'd say 2 LA teams in the West, and then Milwaukee, Toronto, and an outside chance for Miami in the East.
Yeah, and I would agree with most of that. I got, the Lakers and the Bucks obviously on top right now, but I feel like they've kind of been the 2 teams for even before all the coronavirus hit. I feel like they were definitely the top 2 teams.
Yeah.
And then they've come back from, in the bubble now, and I still feel like they're just the best 2 teams. They're so loaded that the other night I was, watching the game, the Lakers game, and I think it was the first 2 quarters. I think LeBron James had like 8 points in the first 2 quarters. And if you would say that LeBron James had 8 points at halftime and the Lakers are winning, I would think you're kidding. But no, they just have so many people on their team. And I think at halftime, I think Davis might have had like 26 or something. So it's just like you can't guard, just one person on that Lakers team. And the same thing for the Bucks. I know the Bucks are more kind of one person, but I feel like the Bucks as a whole can kind of pick up if that one person doesn't have their best game or something like that. I feel like the Bucks are still good enough to win games, and especially in the playoffs when it comes down to multiple games. We're talking like, best of 3, best of 5, even best of 7 series. So you just know that, that if the Bucks show up, maybe they play bad one game, but they're going to come back and probably win this series in the end. So yeah, I got the Lakers from the Western Conference, and then I got the Bucks from the Eastern Conference. So we're going to talk about the MLB, and we're going to start it off with, if you guys haven't heard, St. Louis, basically the whole team is tested positive for COVID, and heard multiple stories about this. And I think the biggest story is that a bunch of players went out to the casino and basically were at a casino, and then they brought it back to the team hotel, and now pretty much I think over half of their team has been tested positive now. So another round of canceled games and canceled, trips for other teams. And it just kind of begs the question. I don't know exactly what the protocols are or what's going on, but it's kind of showing the sports that are putting their teams in bubbles and putting their teams in one location or a couple locations. Those teams, or those players, I guess, are better off with this COVID testing and not getting it than some sports where these players get to go home and they get to go out and they get to go here and there, because it's still out there. But the teams that are in a bubble don't have a chance to get it because they're not leaving the bubble. So it kind of has me thinking that the MLB just, I don't know if they can go in a bubble, because I feel like the MLB is probably the biggest advantage for like home and away, because ballparks are made different and you hit better in a certain ballpark and all that stuff. I don't know if that's why they're still allowing home games and away games. But what do you think about the St. Louis, basically the whole team getting COVID at this point in the season?
You're right to point out kind of the comparisons between sports leagues at this point. You got MLB kind of letting their players have their freedom, if you want to put it that way, compared to the NBA where they're all in the bubble. The good thing about the bubble, though, like you pointed out, is that it does protect the players from some outside influence, some outside sources where they could get COVID. So I think that leagues are sitting back and watching how this is going to go. And they're watching to see what MLB does that works and doesn't work. They're watching to see what NBA does and doesn't work. And I just pulled up an ESPN article here that Rob Manfred, the commissioner of baseball, if you don't know that, still believes that the health protocols the league has in place are working, despite Miami and St. Louis both getting hit pretty hard. It's just a difficult balance. I don't envy the commissioners and the job they have to do for these leagues. It's hard to, like you said, figure out a way to put baseball in a bubble, especially with maybe a lack of adequate indoor facilities compared to basketball. I think it's easier to put together something that could work for basketball. Baseball, not so much. So I don't envy what Rob Manfred has to do, but I'm not sure if it's being carried out at the team level like it should be. I'm not sure if people are being strict enough and saying that these players really need to hunker down and kind of make sure they protect themselves and others on their team. So I am going to sit back and watch this and see how it goes. I hope that it can be limited to basically these two teams getting big outbreaks, but MLB just really needs to kind of have their thumb on teams saying you need to protect your players and make sure they're following these protocols.
Yeah, because not only is the team losing games, but other teams are losing games, which loses money. And I could honestly see, just because this is the world we live in, but I could honestly see a team like St. Louis, or any team for that matter, gets COVID like late in the season from not following correct protocols, and then another team loses out on 3 or 4 games, and then that team sues the other team because that's money they didn't get from television, and it could get just messy quick. And I don't want to see that. I don't want to see that for the game of baseball. I don't want to see that for, just being a fan of baseball. I don't want to see that. So I hope they figure it out soon. I hope that they either figure out what is causing these problems and how to fix them, or they at least figure out a way of better protecting their players than just letting them kind of do their own thing. Because obviously it's proven that holding the players accountable isn't going to work. Just like steroid era, holding the players accountable for themselves isn't going to work. And someone needs to hold them accountable, whether that be the team owner, whether that be the MLB, whoever that needs to be. It doesn't need to be done by the players themselves. It needs to be done from someone a little higher up the food chain that can actually do something about it and stop all these cancellations and games and stuff, because it is not fun when your team has to play this team and here you're ready to watch some baseball and, they play them. Okay, well, there's the next 3 days. I can't watch them. And so it's just it's really unfair, especially when these teams are doing stuff kind of like what they did where they went to a casino. It's just one of those things. It's like, why would you do that? Like, it just doesn't make sense. So I guess we'll wait and see what the MLB does. I've heard them kind of already crack down and say that teams need to stay in their team hotels and they need to have this done and they need to do this, and before they go to the ballpark they can't leave, but they can only stay with their team bus and all this stuff. But we'll wait to see what the MLB does and how they try to crack down on this so that more outbreaks don't happen.
And have we heard what the MLB plans to do as far as these games, as far as if a team, let's say like the Cardinals or the Marlins, if they have to forfeit games, has the MLB said what they're going to do yet as far as making that up, or if they're just losses? I haven't heard anything. Have you?
Yeah, so actually what they're going to do, and I'm glad you brought this up, I should have added it in, but what they're going to do is they're going to play doubleheaders, and I think there's a couple of doubleheaders actually going on today with Philadelphia, I believe. They're going to do doubleheaders, and in those doubleheader games, they're only going to go to 7 innings. That way they can save a couple innings for players and stuff. And then at the end of the 7th inning, they're going to do the rules that they've been doing for extra innings already, where if they're tied in the 7th inning, the 8th inning, a guy will start on second. So they're really trying to kind of shorten the games up since they will be doing doubleheaders. And it sounds like the teams as a whole are welcome to it. I do know there's a bunch of teams that are taking it very, very, I guess, heavy in the fact that they're bringing up bullpen guys instead of your number one pitcher pitching on a Monday early and then your number 2 pitching on the second game. It sounds like most teams are going like you're going to pitch your number 1 pitcher first game, and then the second game is going to be kind of a bullpen game where they just bring in a bunch of bullpen guys and try to make it through the game. That way the players can stay on their every 5-day rotation. And it makes sense because if you get a couple of double headers, say you have a double header on Monday, Tuesday's a normal game, Wednesday's a normal game, and then Thursday's a doubleheader. That's when your pitcher from Monday should be pitching, but he usually pitches on 5 days rest. So it does make sense in the fact that you're going to have a lot of doubleheaders coming up if you're a team that has played one of these teams with an outbreak. So it makes sense. It's just kind of weird, but we'll just have to kind of roll with it and see what happens. But I am glad they kind of figured it out. They're going to do doubleheaders. I think in the last podcast, I brought it up that it'd be smart to do double headers, and they're going to do double headers with 7-inning games, and then they're going to just do the rest of the rules that they've been using so far this season.
Sounds like Rob Manfred might be listening to our podcast. Shout out to Rob.
Well, if he's listening to it, then he knows we aren't huge fans of his.
Yeah.
As long so as the rest of the United States, it seems like not a lot of people are happy with what he's done while he's been in charge.
There have been some notable injuries. I'm going to have Trevor kind of speak more on those. He's been watching the injury reports a little bit more, but have seen a couple influential players been injured early on in this weird season.
Yeah, so the biggest ones lately, and I've done this in the last couple days, so these players have kind of gotten injured in the last couple days, and one is Soroka from the Atlanta Braves. He tore his Achilles tendon, so he's done for the season. One of the main pitchers, if the Braves were going to make a run this year for a World Series, he was kind of their catalyst for doing that. So by losing him, they are going to have to reach deeper into their bullpen or try to figure out another top-end guy because he was kind of, I wouldn't say he was their guy, but Soroka was a really, really good pitcher, and I don't know if the Braves will be able to make it out of the NL now without Soroka being one of their starters. The next guy is Ohtani. He seems to get injured every single year, and it seems like he's done pitching for this year. He's still going to hit on a day-to-day basis, is what I heard. But right now, he has a grade 1 or 2 strain of his flexor, pronator, something like that. Basically, he screwed something up in his arm, in his pitching arm, and it sounds like he's going to be out 4 to 6 weeks before being able to start pitching again. And you have to think that the 4 to 6 weeks is just before he starts doing training again. So he'll have to ramp his whole arm back up again. And it sounds like it's going to be probably 3 months, 2 months before he actually starts seeing any like bullpen games or anything like that. So it sounds like they're just going to shut him down for the rest of the year and just have him hit.
Yeah, and it just seems like, I don't know if it was a lack of actual games being played or what's going on, but you're seeing a lot of injuries to influential players, and you know they have to be practicing even when everything was shut down. So I don't know if it's lack of being in shape, just a lot of stress on, especially for pitchers, their arms after having this time off or what it is. But you're seeing a lot of pitchers on influential, maybe not World Series winning teams, but teams that can make some noise being shut down for different reasons. So it'll be interesting to watch and see if any other pitchers or major players get hurt in this shortened season. And we talked about this in an early podcast, but if you have a player get injured and they're out, like we said, 4 weeks, I mean, that's basically it. That's basically the season. Injuries are going to play even more of a role this year as far as playoff teams and who ends up making the playoffs. So it'll be interesting to keep watching the injury reports for the MLB and see how big of an impact that makes.
Yeah, and as you said that, another player that's got injured the last couple of days is Osuna. He's going to have Tommy John surgery, which means he's done for the season, and that's Houston's closer. So now they're going to have to go out somewhere else and either trade for a top-end closer or try to fill that spot in with a guy they already have on their team. But it's just one of those, one of the big dogs that are trying to, make it to another World Series, and now they don't have their closer, and they won't have him for the rest of the season. So another big injury, and then just right before we started doing this podcast, I actually was watching the Nationals game, and Scherzer in the first inning ended up limping off. They don't know exactly what's wrong with him, but if a person like Scherzer goes down for a month, I mean, that completely changes the Washington Nationals' chances at getting anywhere in the playoffs. I mean, he was a huge part to why they won it last year, and, I mean, he's one of the best pitchers in the game. You're seeing it with Houston. They lost Verlander basically for the whole year, if not the whole year. I mean, these top great pitchers, these number one aces, are getting injured, and it's really changing kind of the look of baseball and kind of the teams that are playing. So we'll see what the injuries keep doing, if they kind of dial back the further we get into it, whether people are getting more in shape or if their arms are getting used to, throwing. I'm not 100% sure what's causing it. I've heard some doctors say that they just didn't have enough time to warm up, but I've also heard some say, no, they've been doing programs this whole time, so there's no reason that their arms should be a problem. So it's kind of, depends on which side you fall on.
Next, we're going to move on to hockey. It's probably not something we're going to cover a lot. Neither one of us are experts or watch it all that much. But two things intrigued me in hockey this past week, 2 weeks. They did start their playoffs, kind of a new playoff situation, but they started that on August 1st. They're doing a 24-team playoff, and I think normally they have 16 teams, 8 from each conference, but just because of everything going on, they have a 24-team playoff this year. The hubs, or I guess you could call it a bubble, are in Toronto, where 12 teams from the Eastern Conference are, and then Edmonton, where 12 teams from the Western Conference are. Like I said, neither one of us are experts, but if you haven't gone and watched a hockey game, even if it's minor league, I would encourage it. It's one of those sports kind of like lacrosse, where if you haven't seen it in person, it's a whole different animal. So I would encourage you going and watching hockey, but may not be something we cover a lot. But The way the playoffs will go is that the top 4 teams in each conference, as they enter these playoffs, are playing in round-robin games for seeding. Then the other 8 teams in each conference, so the 5 through 12 seeds, are playing best-of-5 series for who's going to make it into, quote-unquote, the official playoffs. So, like, the 5 seed is going to be playing the 12 seed, 6 will be playing 11, that sort of thing. And they're just playing 5-game series. Like I said, it started on August 1st, and like I said, official Stanley Cup playoffs started on the 11th. So you got quite a few games being played here in only about 10 days. I checked the schedule today, and it seems like they got about 5 games per day going on in these hubs at least. So they're trying to knock out quite a bit here in a short amount of time. Then the other hockey story I wanted to hit on is an expansion team that the NHL is putting into place for next season. The Seattle Kraken, which is just a great name for an expansion team that's unique, kind of ties into Seattle with the Mariners and their kind of nautical history, and looked up a little bit more, researched a little bit more about them today. I think they went through something like 1,000 or over 1,000 names when they're trying to decide, narrowed it down to about 100, did some more like marketing, testing, that sort of thing, and ended up with the Kraken, which is like a really intense name. They got a really good logo, and I think I saw today on ESPN on a story that they have had the most successful like expansion launch ever in the NHL. The Las Vegas Golden Knights a couple years ago, they did really well getting ticket sales and merchandise sales, but I think the Seattle Kraken have passed them for just the number of tickets committed to and merch sold. So definitely doing a good marketing job there in Seattle in the NHL.
Yeah, and I saw this actually pop up on my Twitter when I was scrolling through Twitter, and I saw it pop up, and I was like, wow, this must be some, team I've never heard of before, and I was like, huh, that's a really cool logo, and I was like, whose team is this? And I was like searching, I was like, Seattle Kraken, who are these people? And then I was looking at their Twitter, and someone said, something about welcome to the NHL, and I was like, oh, I didn't even know. So it's funny how I found out that they were an expansion team. I found it through going through Twitter and seeing a cool logo and being like, wow, what sports team has that awesome logo?
I think they're going to get a lot of interest just based off of like internet chatter and stuff on Twitter, and people saying, ooh, there's this new team, there's this team with a really cool logo and a really cool name, and that might drive some interest to a team that's just starting out. So it'll be fun to watch and see how it develops hockey in Seattle.
Yeah, and another exciting thing that kind of brings people to it is that last couple of days we've heard that The Rock, Dwayne Johnson, is part of an investment group that is going to buy the XFL for about $15 million. If you don't know anything about the XFL, they filed for bankruptcy, I think this year, right? Like during the Corona thing?
Yeah, it was with, I think it might have been before, but it was within like a month of getting started back up. They had a lot of hype behind them and played about like a month or 2 of games, had some solid TV numbers, and then just out of nowhere, it seemed like they filed for bankruptcy. So.
Yeah, so it sounds like there's a new group of people. It's not just The Rock, but he's kind of the main headliner. You know how big he is and stuff. So he's gonna apparently be the face of it. I don't know if that's exactly what I should say. If he's gonna be, I don't know what part he's playing or how much he's actually owning of it. But it does sound like the XFL will be back. Sometime, hopefully soon. Don't know if I feel like the XFL would actually really, really work right now because they play in arenas and they don't, just the way they play and stuff. I feel like it would be a very, very good time to start now. I know they're not going to just start right up again because all of these players and stuff, and they're going to have to sign contracts, and there's going to be a lot of paperwork and a lot of stuff going on before any games are played. But it does look like the XFL will get kind of a new relaunch, and it sounds like The Rock is going to be a part of it.
Yeah, when I heard the news, it made a lot of sense. I think Vince McMahon, who owns WWE, was the one that launched the XFL this time and before when there was another iteration of the XFL. So that wrestling connection definitely made sense, and there's probably some sort of discussions behind the scenes with The Rock and Vince McMahon and the relationship they already have. And if you don't know, If you don't know a lot about The Rock pre-wrestling, he did play football at the University of Miami and then did try to make it professionally. I think he may have played in the NFL for like 1 or 2 seasons, not getting a lot of playing time. Went up to Canada, tried to play. So he has a passion for football and has that connection to Vince McMahon and the higher-ups that were running the XFL. So it makes a lot of sense. And I know a lot of people want some sort of spring or you call it off-season football. There's enough appetite for it all year round that if the XFL can make a good product, if The Rock gets his marketing team on it and can get something that will draw people in, I think it could work. It's just every time we've seen spring football or off-season football before, it seems like they don't have enough money or don't have the time to dedicate to it. So somebody with the money that The Rock has and his experience in kind of the limelight may help finally get this off the ground.
Yeah, and I feel like, kind of like what you said earlier, I feel like it kind of was off the ground and working well. I know there was a bunch of memes and stuff about it because they would interview players during the game and stuff like that, and it was all based kind of, I wouldn't say a show, but it was a little more showy than the NFL. Like, they do these cool interviews and they, like stuff they don't do in the NFL. And I feel like that kind of set them apart and made it more fun and entertaining to watch. So I feel like the XFL was going in the right direction. I feel like the coronavirus and all that stuff just hit at the wrong time and they just weren't able to get out of it. And they just couldn't blossom out of it quick enough. But I think The Rock will definitely help. It'll definitely give them more notoriety for just regular people because people know who The Rock is. Most people just know him by The Rock, but his real name's Dwayne Johnson. And as you said, he played football, so he's got that background. He's worked with Vince McMahon, so he has that background. I feel like it's just a perfect fit for the XFL right now. And so hopefully we get some XFL action soon.
I think that's about it for this week. We thank you, everybody, for listening to the podcast. We appreciate you guys listening. If you haven't subscribed, make sure you subscribe wherever you listen to your podcasts, places like Apple, Spotify, wherever you're listening. Make sure you find Slackers Sports Show and subscribe. We also have a YouTube channel. We have at least one video up. I'm going to try to have more content going out on a routine basis. You can find that by searching Slackers Sports Show. And you can also find us on Twitter to get updates on us, interesting stories in sports, different things we're interested in. And you can find that at Slackers Sports. You got anything else?
Nope, I think that's good. And we will see you again this Sunday. We'll be coming out with the NFC South. Last week, I think we did the West and we already did the East. This time, it's NFC South. So look for that coming out Sunday. And then we will be back next week, Thursday.